right, welcome. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on day 3. It's the final day of the 33rd Annual FIRST Conference. I'm Tracy with the FIRST Events team and will be assisting with host responsibilities in this stream today. Just a quick reminder before we get started. Speaker Q&A will take place in our conference work adventure platform. If you're just joining the stream and are not pre-registered, please send an email to events@first.org to get set up on the system. Work Adventure is where all of our social activities are, as well as our exhibitor hall. Today is sadly the last day of our Work Adventure environment, so please take advantage of the networking opportunities and get those scavenger hunt submissions in. Work Adventure will close at 2000 UTC today. Okay, let's get started. I'd like to introduce our session moderator for the next hour, Ryusuke Masuka. Ryu is a research principal at Fujitsu System Integration Laboratories. Ryu, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Tracy. This is Ryusuke Masuoka, and I'm moderating this breakout stream session number 1. And the title of the talk is Attacking Bluetooth Low Energy Design and Implementation in Mobile and Wearable Ecosystems. The speakers are Sunil Kumar, Principal Security Analyst of Deep Armor, and Nitin Laxman. Sorry, he's also a Principal Security Analyst, Deep Armor. I hope I pronounce your name correct, close enough. And okay, thank you. And there's kind of a demo through a video, and I'm looking forward to it too. So the floor is yours, Sunil and Nitin.
Thank you, Ryu. Hello, everyone. Today our topic is on wearable ecosystem and Bluetooth, attacking the Bluetooth low energy design and implementation on mobile phones. Let's get started. Before that, quick introduction about us. I am Sunil, working as Principal Security Analyst in Deep Armor. Before this, I was in Ola Security Team and RSM Technology. Today, I have with me Nitin Lakshmanan. He is also a Principal Security Analyst in Deep Armor. Before this, he was in Aegis Networks and RSM Technology. Regarding Deep Armor, it's a security consulting firm. We do penetration testing, vulnerability assessments for our client, and we also provide various security trainings to organizations. Today's agenda is, first we will explain about the IoT ecosystem. Then we talk about challenges faced in securing these never-before gadgets. Then we talk about Bluetooth and BLE security. And Nitin will be showing some cool demos on how to sniff the traffic and how to eavesdrop on the data. Finally, we conclude our presentation with proposal on securing these kind of gadgets. Yeah, this is how a IoT ecosystem looks like. It has mainly 4 components: mobile phones, cloud, hardware devices, and the protocols. Let's take an example of home automation. In an home automation system, there will be devices called as nodes, which will be having sensors, will be deployed across the house. And this will be collecting information like temperature, fire alarms, home security alarms, and more. At regular intervals, this node will be sending information to the gateway through the low power consuming protocols like Zigbee, Z-Wave. Gateway being the device which computes the larger part, it sends this sensor information to the backend services, which will be deployed on the cloud. This cloud can be private or public cloud. We know that well-known public clouds like Amazon, GCP, and Azure. User of the home automation can use the mobile application that you see on the right side to see the or monitor the house at any given point. And this mobile phones can also be used to configure the gateway through Bluetooth, BLE, or Wi-Fi direct. In some IoT ecosystems, these mobile phones can be eliminated where the larger part of computations will be done on the gateway. One more interesting factor is there can be multiple nodes and multiple gateways across the system. It is not restricted to one gateway or one node. Based on the requirement of the product, these can be multiplied. Yeah, let's take a case study of in-ear fitness coach. This is a head-on device which is mainly used for the athletes to improve their athletics activities. It can be worn during the running, it can be worn during the cycling, and it does a lot more by taking instructions. It's a wearable, so it should be comfortable, and it should be smart enough to take the user commands and respond back. And it should also be untethered because no users like to use their gadgets with wire dangling around them. And it should have a feature like continuous learning to see the activities of user and provide inputs based on the activities done by the user. Overall, it should improve the quality of life of a user. And one more interesting thing is users like to see their activities in pictorial representation and not just in the plain text. There are quite challenges in securing these kind of gadgets because our traditional SDLC frameworks are mainly applied for products which run for a long time and with a constant requirement. But whereas in these type of gadgets, time to it to market will be very less and the requirements can be continuously evolving. And when we see protocols for these kind of gadgets, you will be ending up with around 30 to 40 different low power consuming protocols. So choosing a proper protocol for your product will be one more difficult job. And when we choose a proper protocol, adoption of this protocol for your device will be one more big factor. So we have a demo on how a weak adoption of protocol can lead to data eavesdropping. Another few factors are longevity of the IoT products and privacy. And there is not much research on this IoT security section also. There are few technical challenges as well. As we know that these wearables will be collecting a lot of information like geolocation of user, biometric data, sensor data, and even some wearable devices will accept the payment as well. So securing these kind of gadgets is must. So these gadgets will be running with limited software stacks. They will be running firmware with less kilobytes. So implementing security features on these type of device will be little difficult and quite challenging also. Security requirements like Diffie-Hellman key exchange process, trusted execution environments are little bit challenging. And along with the hardware device, we need to protect our cloud and the mobile applications as well. Yeah, let's jump into the BLE part. This BLE is a subset of Bluetooth. It will be used for short-range data exchange thing. It operates at frequency 2.4 to 2.485 gigahertz, and its range varies from 10 to 600 meters. This Bluetooth is maintained and organized, governed by the Bluetooth SIG group. The recent version of Bluetooth is 5.0. We know that this Bluetooth is widely used in various sectors like wearable devices, healthcare systems, earphones, and more. Coming to the pairing mechanism, there are mainly 4 pairing mechanisms. This secure simple pairing is introduced from Bluetooth version 2.1. This mainly simplifies the pairing mechanism of Bluetooth device. As I told, there are 4 mechanisms. One is just work, where there is no user interface and there will be no user authentication. The temporary key will be all 6 zeros. Whereas in the numeric comparison, there will be a button and a display. User should press yes or no, seeing the pin on the display. The third one is passkey entry, where the device will be having a display and a keypad to enter the pin. The last one is out of band signal pairing. The user authentication will be done based through the another protocols like NFC or Wi-Fi Direct to exchange the primary temporary key. After exchanging this temporary keys and ending up with the long-term key, the traffic will be encrypted using AES-128 algorithm. The more about key will be explained in the later part of the presentation. There are few weaknesses in the Bluetooth or BLE protocol. The security of the communication mainly depends upon the pairing algorithm that we just saw. Just works, as I said, the temporary key will be 0000000. So it is mainly prone to man in the middle kind of attacks. And if somebody sniffs all the packets related to pairing, they can extract the or exfiltrate the long-term key. We have a demo for this and we will be showing that. And finally, apps on the phone. This is one interesting part, that there are chances that malware applications on the phone can sniff your BLE data. I'm adding it to Nitin. You'll be showing demos and explaining the vulnerabilities in this.
Thank you, Sunil. Hello, everyone. So as Sunil explained, we are going to get into a few demos. We have recorded demos with us. And you can see that these are the two devices which are in talk now for the demos. So first one, the golden colored one, is the Fossil Q Dreamer developed by Intel, and second one is a popular fitness tracker device. And these are fitness tracker device, and they give you notifications, calculate your steps, calories, and give the inputs to the mobile devices. And we have discovered these problems in the ecosystem, in this Bluetooth ecosystem, and we have responsibly disclosed these vulnerabilities. So these are the tools which we are going to use. The first one is the Ubertooth one, which is an open source Bluetooth tool, and it is used for pen testing and all other sniffing activities. It is developed by Great Scott Gadgets, and it works on the 2.4 gigahertz frequency. And the second one is Wireshark. As many of the people know, it is a network packet analyzing tool. And we are going to use another tool called Crackle, which is developed by Micreon. We will be seeing about this in the later slides. So this is how the setup looks like. So we have the Ubertooth one connected to the system, which is displayed there on the left side. So that is the Ubertooth one, and it is going to sniff the traffic between the mobile device and the devices, the smart devices, wearable devices. So this is what we are expected. Expectation is that when this device, fitness tracker, communicates with the mobile phone, we will be able to capture the activity data like step count and calories in an unencrypted environment. So we will be showing the steps to capture and other things in the second part of the exercise. So the first part we have already captured it, and we are going to display you the packet captured using Wireshark. So this is how the packet looked like when we captured it between the device and the phone. So you can see that the unencrypted BLE attributes and other GAT characteristics are visible in this packets. And also you can, as we did some research to find the step count and calories, we found the offsets, and you can see at the bottom we have highlighted the step count and calories which are being transferred from the mobile from the device to the mobile. So this brings to the concept of LTK, because you can see that in this communication everything was unencrypted. So this brings to LTK, which is long-term key. This key will be used for encrypting the Bluetooth communication. So the process is like when the phone will send a request for pairing, and the device will respond with a pairing response. And once it is exchanged, there will be a temporary key exchange, like one of the methods which was previously explained by Sunil. And using this temporary key, we will be generating a slave random number, a master random number. And using these three values, there will be a short-term key developed. So this short-term key is used for encrypting the long-term key. So a long-term key will be generated, and it will be encrypted using the short-term key and then sent between the devices. So now this communication, which is happening between the device and the phone, will be encrypted using LTK. That is the long-term key. Along with this, many other keys like IRK and CSRK for identity resolving keys and signature resolving keys will be transferred in this process. So this was how the connection for agreement for LTK happened. So the pairing request, then the pairing response from the mobile, then establish the short-term key and the encrypt and send the long-term key. Once it is agreed, the connection will be the communication between the device and the phone will be encrypted. So now we are going to see how it happens. So for this, we are going to take the fossil Q dreamer. As previously explained, this device has no display. It sends your calories and step count and other notifications. So this fossil Q dreamer uses the LTK key to encrypt the communication between the device and the phone. So this is the expectation now. So when we capture the traffic between the device and the phone, we are expected to get the encrypted step count and calories. As previously we saw in the previous example, we were getting unencrypted step count and calories. We will be getting encrypted packet here. So let's jump into the demo. So now what we are going to do is we are going to start the Ubertooth application, and we are going to use Wireshark to display the captured packets from the Ubertooth tool. So we have created a pipe and we are going to listen in the Ubertooth device. So once the Ubertooth device is started, you will be able to see lots of traffic being generated. Because there will be lots of Bluetooth devices around you sending discovery packets and other packets. So now you can see lots of data is being already generated in the traffic, and we are interested in a particular packet, which is the connection packet. So now we are going to pair the fossil device to the phone. And while it is pairing, we are going to capture the pairing request and response. So we have applied filters for that, and we are waiting for the pairing to happen. So once the pairing happens, we will be able to see the L2 cap fragments. We are able to see the L2 cap fragments, and we are also able to see the LL encryption request, LL encryption response, and start encryption. So once this is where the LTK key is transferred between the devices, and once it is transferred, the entire communication is L2 cap fragments. So previously, if you remember in the screenshot which we showed for the previous device, it was able to display the ATT and the other gap characteristics of Bluetooth. But we are now having only the encrypted communication. So does this mean that LTK is enough to secure your communication, like between the devices and the phone? No. So what we can do is, there is a tool called Crackle developed by Mike Ryan, which exploits this flaw in BLE pairing process, and it will be able to generate the temporary key and also figure out the short-term key, which leads to the long-term key. So we will run the captured PCAP, the traffic which we have captured for this process, and we'll send it to this Crackle tool. So now we will be saving this packet, and we will be showing how it can be used against the Crackle tool. So we are going to pass this PCAP to the Crackle device, and you will be able to see that Crackle has already decoded, and it has decrypted, and it has found the LTK key. As it is using just work mechanism, like just works like 0000 as the temporary key, Crackle was able to crack it very quickly on the first attempt, and it was able to generate the LTK key as well. So now it shows that having LTK key is not, LTK encryption is not enough, and we are able to simply crack it using a tool, and we will be showing that same PCAP file decrypted in the Wireshark now. So once the filter is applied, we will be able to see all the communication. So now you can see that all the ATT and the GAT characteristics and all the offsets which are transferred between the phone and the device are being captured there. There is no encryption of L2P caps only. There are all other informations which we are looking for in the packet. So what had happened now is the fossil device was trying to pair with the mobile phone, and we are able to sniff the traffic using Ubertooth, and we have ended up with the encrypted packets. And this encrypted packets, when passed to the crackle, we are able to get the decrypted packet. So does this mean that crackle fossil is broken? Is it vulnerable to any attacks? Before we get the conclusion, we will also see in another form of vulnerability where how another ecosystem challenge can cause the problems in Bluetooth communication. Over to you, Sunil.
Thank you, Nitin. Yeah, let's look into the another challenge in the ecosystem. For this, we will be mainly concentrating on mobile application and the device, and we will be seeing the Bluetooth and BLE traffic here. Yeah, this is how a communication happens between device and phone. You can see there is a lot of data exchanging between these two. Mobile application sends commands like firmware updates, change the BLE name, social app notifications. Even some wearables are capable of accepting a call and replying to the text. Whereas from the device to mobile, it will be mainly about the activities, responses to the messages from applications, social app notifications, and more. So as Nitin explained, this traffic will be encrypted or encrypted using the LTK keys. So if an attacker sniffs this traffic, you will be ending up with the garbage data that is encrypted data. So the problem really comes when there is a malware application sitting on the mobile itself. So what happens here is when the data reaches the Bluetooth layer decrypts the encrypted BLE data and sends it to the application layer. So any app on the application layer with Bluetooth permissions can access the unencrypted BLE data and sniff all the data. In this case, it can be OTP, it can be step count, or it can be any personal data that exchanges between these two. For the root cause of this problem is because in the BLE, in the Bluetooth spec itself, it is mentioned any application with Bluetooth or Bluetooth admin permission, they can read the BLE characteristics just like the legitimate app. So in Android, a malware application needs Bluetooth or Bluetooth admin permission, whereas in the iOS, core Bluetooth framework permissions are required. So here you can see the highlighted part. It says in the Bluetooth spec, Bluetooth admin permissions will be coming with other capabilities also, but applications should not misuse it to any other extent. So now we have seen LTK can be cracked, malware application can read your BLE data. Does this mean fossil device is broken? The answer is no, because the fossil uses one more extra layer of protection, that is application level encryption. During the initial stages, the fossil device and the fossil application will be exchanging application level secret. This secret will be used to encrypt all the data exchanging between the device and the application. So if somebody over there can use crack the LTK, but they will be ending up with the encrypted packets, encrypted data through the application secret. Similarly, malware application reading the unencrypted data, unencrypted BLE data will also be seeing the encrypted data that is done through the application secret. So the fossil is not broken because it is using the application level secret. And this is the recommended way to implement BLE security or Bluetooth security in the wearable devices. So the proposal for these kind of devices is we need to use the tailored SDLC procedure that apps based on the requirements and the time to hit time to hit the market for these next generation devices. And it is also necessary to use the shift left policy, that is to bring the security in the early stages of the product itself. Another important thing is we need to include privacy in the SDLC procedure, and also we should adapt to industry standards like OAS, NIST, CWE, and more. And we have seen that when these different four components are coming together, there will be a lot of new issues rising in the ecosystem itself. So it is important to secure the components individually and when they are integrated as well. Yeah, that's how we conclude our presentation. We will be in the work adventure to take up the Q&A. Hope you guys enjoyed this.
Thank you, Sunil and Nitin, and thank you for being on time. And I also thank you for the participants. So as Sunil mentioned, they are going to be at the Q&A room in the works adventure, the first floor above the expo and entrance floor. So thank you again, and please give a virtual round of applause. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Masuka.
Thanks, guys.
See.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tracy. Bye.
All right, Ryu, I think we're ready to go with our next set of speakers, Eric and Frank. Oh, you're on mute.
So in 2 minutes?
Yeah, well, actually, if we have Eric and Frank are here, if you guys are ready, I think we can actually just get going.
Okay. Oh, so do
Excellent.
I start it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, you
that is
may.
my cue. Okay, got it. Okay, so so this is Ryusuke Masaoka, the moderator for this session. This is talk number 2 of the breakout session number 1, and the talk is defense graph analysis for supporting SOC and CSIRT operations. And the speakers are Eric Ringdahl, product director of FIRSTCON21, and Frank Franzen, he's a senior scientist of TNO. And I'm looking for this talk, as I cannot agree more with the statement in the abstract. You can't protect what you don't know. So without further ado, please start. The floor is yours, Eric and Frank. Please go ahead.
So thank you. My name is Frank Franzen. And welcome to the session. In this session, we, Eric Ringdahl and myself, will present on how we see that attack defense graphs analysis will support SOC CSIRT operations. And so this is part of ongoing research in a European project, H2020 project, as they are called Socrates. And as you can see in the title of the Socrates name, attack defense graphs is yeah, one of the founding components in there. We started in September 2019, and so we are more than halfway further. We are doing this project with 10 partners, and each partner has a specific role and bring their own expertise. Particularly relevant are 2 partners that are end users in our concept, and that is Memnonic, which is an MSSP in Norway, and then Vattenfall, which is an energy supplier in Europe, a big one, and their security operations center in Poland, which provides the SOC services to all their business units for the IT environment. They will function as pilot environments for the project, and each of the other partners bring technology. Probably Zero Server. They will bring threat intel specific for the platform, but I will show you that a little bit later. But what is it that we do, and why do we do that? So the why is best expressed with this ENISA threat landscape statement from 2017 that said cybersecurity community is still far from striking the balance between the defenders and attackers. And then the last sentence where you see the increase in the defense levels and expenses cannot successfully reduce the cyber threat exposure. So you can even increase the level of funding, but we are still having troubles here. So and this is not only caused by the asymmetry between the defenders and the attackers, where the attackers only have to succeed once and the defenders have to always succeed in protecting everything. But this has to do with a couple of elements also. So the ICT infrastructure is increasingly complex and changing into the interdependencies between all these components is making it complex. And if we don't know what it actually looks like, and it's changing all the time, then it is becoming harder and harder to actually defend it. You can only defend what you know that you can defend. On the other hand, we see that there is an increase in the number of attacks and the complexity of these attacks. And that leads to an increase in the number of events that the SOC has to get to work on, and not only the things that you can detect on the log events, but also on all the threat information and vulnerability information, etc. So all the relevant information has to be dealt with and considered in the context of your own infrastructure. And then we also see that attacks get more automated, and whereas the response from incident response teams is typically human-centered. So it's actually machine speed versus human speed, which is not the greatest situation. And where, in addition to that, you also see that there is a shortage of skilled cybersecurity staff that actually is capable of doing this incident response task. So given this, and the statement above, we think that there is a need for change, and we need to do more automation and support the SOCs and the CSIRTs that protect our infrastructure. And so the project objective is develop and implement a security automation and decision support platform that enhances the effectiveness of the SOC CSIRT operation. And as you can see from the picture, it's not the intention that we take the human out of the SOC, but we want to add more automation to enable them to make more informed decisions, decisions on what is going on, but also decisions on what are the options for response. So we identified 5 use cases for which we actually want to come up with analysis and the responses, and that is ongoing attacks. So we detect an attack, we assess what's going on, what is the threat, what is the impact, what are the ways to contain the incident, and then we provide that to the SOC CSIRT analysts, and then they can choose to activate our suggested response. The same is for new threat intel. When we learn of a new type of attack or a new way that a particular APT group is doing their attacks, and we can assess that in the context of our infrastructure and determine if we have to take particular measures to be better protected against those threats. The third use case is when we discover a vulnerability in our assets. So we run a vulnerability scanner. Some assets are software has new vulnerabilities in there. We assess what that means for that host, but we can also assess what it means for other assets, and if those assets are compromised more easily due to the bug in some other system. And the same is for use case 4 and 5, which is a system configuration for use case 4 and new systems being added. And each of these are just events that we automatically want to assess what that means for the exposure of certain critical assets in our infrastructure, and if we have to take certain precautions. So there is a big difference between use case 1 and the other use cases. So this is actually an incident response case. We have an active adversary in our midst, and yeah, you have to be careful how to actually go about it. So this is a bit of a difference than these ones. The other ones are more focused on increasing the resilience of the infrastructure before the actual adversary comes along and try to exploit it. So based on these use cases, we identified capabilities, and that were the basis for building this Socrates component architecture. We don't have time to actually go into all the details of it, but you can see that at the bottom, there's the typical things like detection here. This is a seam which is existing. That's why we made it light blue. But we have several components that interact or collect data from the infrastructure. We have threat intel up here, and shadow server is up here collecting malicious data and then analyzing it and providing that as threat intel. And on the top row, we have analysis tools, and in the middle, you see is an orchestration and integration engine. We use activity, that's a workflow tool to make the workflow for the use cases that we have. And as an integration engine to communicate to all these tools, we use the Cortex platform from the Hive project. And that enables us also to easily add other tools because the Hive project has already provided several interactions, Cortex analyzers and responders for integration in that. So that is what the platform looks like. But in this talk, we focus on the infrastructure modeling component and on the A2G analyzer. And the question is, why do we actually need this? Then we have to explain a bit about what A2G analyzer actually is. And that is easily explained by saying, well, you have a model of the ICT infrastructure. Then you have models of an attack step and how the attacker goes about. You place an attacker on the model, probably on a firewall connected to the internet, but you can also place it, if you know there's an asset compromised, you can place it on that asset and then see how you will maybe go further in your infrastructure. But if you have this done, these two components, then you can calculate the attack path of the attacker, how you can compromise a particular asset in your infrastructure and all these steps. Erik will present this and also demonstrate this, but yeah, we need a model of our infrastructure, and that infrastructure changes. So we need a tool that can automatically provide this model for every time we want to analyze it for a new type of event. For each of these new use cases, we do analysis based using these type of tools. So we looked around for an infrastructure modeling component that could provide it. In some environments that can, but for a typical enterprise ICT environment, we couldn't find such a tool, so we had to build our own. This is kind of how it looks like. So we have existing scanning tools or data sources that can be used. We have adapters to collect that, and we want to automatically scan the infrastructure, continuously update the data. We want to normalize the data so that we can understand for these applications what it actually means, that we don't have different languages. Time dimension is important so that we can say what does the infrastructure look like now, but we can also ask the question, what does the infrastructure look like a month ago, and that can be beneficial for threat hunting. And it has to be multi-organization because MSSPs have to also be able to use it. So the concept of an organization, a customer has to be in there. So when we started to build this, we identified that these components were actually similar to what Memnonic has built for their ACT platform. ACT platform is a threat intel platform. It's open source, and we use it also in the Socrates platform as a threat intel platform. And it's you can get it at this address. I think that it has been presented at first in previous sessions before, so it's an existing component. We have to change the data model in here so that we don't have the threat intel. So we changed it a bit for our own. And the data model that is actually used is, it looks like now this. So we have a host, which is assigned an IP address. The IP address is a member of a network segment. You have routes. You can have firewall rules assigned if this host is a firewall. And there is software that runs on the host with potentially vulnerabilities, and we have the CVE identifier there. It has to be extendable in a way so that we can add it. And one of the things that we are currently working on is adding Active Directory with it. So we had a talk today already, but we have to extend this model also a bit. But this helps us also to analyze the user policies. And NetFlow data, and this is particular for the impact assessment relevant for which assets have a relationship with other assets and how much traffic do they obtain. And that can say something a bit about impact there. So this is the data model that we have currently. And this is how it looks like at the moment. This is the test network. So you have network segments here with issued IP addresses. This is the host. We don't have the fully qualified domain name here, but the IP address, the running software on it, and the CVE. This is a test network, it's very basic, but yeah. And this is where I hand over to Eric.
Thank you,
I will
Frank.
stop sharing.
Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, I'm Eric. I work for CD, and I want to talk about what we do in the ADG, so the Attack Defense Graph Analyzer in the Socrates project. So the main purpose behind the ADG is to perform attack simulations to be able to predict how an attacker might move through your infrastructure and how risks might propagate. And with this, we will also quantify how likely it is that these attacks are successful, and also find the most critical attack paths to your high-value assets. And we can do this in a few different types of scenarios. So looking at the current infrastructure and how it looks now, and with the security configuration you have. We can run simulations once you make changes to this architecture, and when there are new vulnerabilities, or when you have added security controls, for example. We can also tailor this simulation to new threat intelligence. So how the attacker behaves is dependent on new threat intelligence. Also changing how the attacker behaves based on what type of threat actor we expect in our infrastructure. And also we can look at probable causes and effects of indications of compromise, which I'm going to demo for you today. And the high-level architecture is, so these simulations in Socrates are triggered by a Cortex analyzer. So it's a part of a framework called Cortex by the Hive project, and we use that to integrate with the different components. So the analyzer will collect data from the IMC, so the infrastructure modeling component, so collect data about the environment, and also threat intelligence, so about threat actors and threat intelligence. And then we have the orchestrator that is integrating all of the components and triggering the simulation based on specific types of scenarios or use cases. And the functionality the ADG provides is provided by a tool by us called SecureCAD, which is based on open source framework called the meta attack language, where you can define the logic of these types of attack simulations. But the main concept is that we create a model of the infrastructure, we run attack simulations on that to then analyze our environment and find suggested mitigations, the critical attack paths, and also quantify how much effort is required for the attacker to succeed. So these models are automatically generated based on data from the infrastructure modeling component, but it can also be generated from data sources such as your cloud infrastructure or data sources that you have in your environment already. So these models contains then information about your environment, so the hosts and the firewalls and the users and their permissions, but it also contains information about soft values like the user's security awareness, and if you have processes applied for certain security controls and so on. And all of this logic and this specification is defined in this meta attack language framework. We can also account for uncertainty. So you might not have data about everything in your environment or about how your users behaves on their free time and so on. But we can account for that uncertainty by using these models, and also by using Monte Carlo simulations in our simulation engine. So what happens when we run these simulations is that we generate these huge graphs of all possible paths of an attacker through the environment. So how can an attacker move through our environment based on the data we have? And we use then Monte Carlo simulations to sample this graph and also do shortest path calculations to find the shortest path or the most likely path through this complex attack graph. So all of the security expertise and the logic of the attacks is built into the tool. So you don't have to have that expertise, but the tool does that for you. And by doing this, we can also quantify the results. And the metric that we use is called time to compromise. And that's basically the probability over time that an attacker will succeed. And you can see it as like effort required for an attacker. So a low time to compromise means that it is very certain that the attacker will succeed and it requires no effort at all. A high time to compromise means that it's really complicated and it might require some complex types of attacks, or there is a lot of uncertainty in the simulation. And then based on the simulation, the tool will then generate reports on your risk exposure, the threats and weaknesses that you might have, and the impact to your high-value assets, and also these critical paths to these high-value assets. And these paths will then expose how an attacker would be able to move through your environment, but also how we can stop the attacker as soon as possible, what we call suggested security controls or suggested mitigations. So how can we stop the attacker from succeeding as soon as possible? So I'm going to show you how this works in a brief demo. And I'm going to show you in an AWS environment, a test bed that we have set up in AWS. I don't have access to the Socrates platform at the moment, so we will use GuardDuty as the threat detection in this case for AWS. But that's a great thing about Socrates, the platform as well, that it's modular and you can change out components as you deploy it. So in this case, we will look at AWS and we will use GuardDuty to detect the threat in our environment. So the AWS environment that we have is a small, simple multi-VPC environment. We have a few virtual machines, some networking and peering and load balancing. And we have some sensitive data here. We have some customer records in an S3 bucket, so a storage service in AWS. And we also have some customer data in a database. So that's our high-value assets in this case. And now GuardDuty has detected or had raised an alarm because we have some command and control activity detected on a Bastion host in our environment. So that is our starting point when I run this demo, and we're going to look at the possible impact of this command and control activity. Also look at the root cause, so we can see how was the attacker able to reach this Bastion host. And we're going to look at some top threats and suggested mitigations for this environment. So I'm going to jump over to SecureCAD. And what we see here now is a list of collected data from our environment, which is AWS in this case. So the tool will automatically generate a model of your environment, and we can take a look at that here. So what we see now is a visualization of our AWS environment. We can zoom in a bit here to see our customer database, for example, a virtual machine called our web server. And we also have our Bastion host here. And I can just show you quickly here in AWS. So this is the AWS console, and this is the virtual machines that is running in our demo environment. So what we see here is a representation of that data that we have actually in AWS right now. So it's all your network configuration, the IAM setup, all the users and their permissions, and so on. And all of that is represented in this model. What we can also see here is our attacker coming from the internet in this case, but it is also connected directly to our Bastion host. So, so we had this command and control activity in our environment. So the attacker will start from that Bastion host, and we will then see how that could affect our environment. So this is the attack scenario that we are gonna simulate. So let's go back and look at the report for that simulation. So we have, based on the threat detected by guard duty in this case, we started a scenario and got a simulation of that scenario, and we are now looking at the report for that specific case. So we get some high level risk exposure values. And we also get detailed information about our high-value assets. So if you remember, we had a customer database and an S3 bucket with some sensitive customer data. And we can see, based on our simulations, that from the Bastion host, the attacker is able to basically read all of our customer data, also delete and write the customer data in our database here. And the time to compromise, as mentioned earlier, is really low, which means the attacker is succeeding very easily and with a very high probability. And we can look at why that is now. So now we're looking at one of these critical paths. So how is the attacker able to impact our high-value assets based on the threat detection that we got? So the attacker is starting on our Bastion host because that's where we got the alarm. We know there is some suspicious activity here. And then, based on our AWS configuration in this case, the attacker is able to exfiltrate credentials to a database management role, which is attached to this virtual machine, which then lets the attacker basically change the master password to the database and then compromise it completely. And in this case, read the database. So that is how the attacker succeeded with our database. If we look at the S3 bucket, we get some other paths. And here we can actually see that there's also a vulnerability in our environment here, because with the integration with other components, we can also take data from, for example, a vulnerability scanner and see how these vulnerabilities could affect us in the context of our environment. So as we see here, the attacker is also able to reach our S3 bucket based on this vulnerability. But there are also other paths. So if you remember, these are Monte Carlo simulations, like a statistical method. So there are other paths that are possible, but they are less likely and will produce a higher time to compromise, so they are less likely to succeed. but they are still possible given the configuration and the attacker profile, so the type of attacker we are simulating. And we also get some information about common denominators between these attacks, risk exposure and risk vectors. So a threat summary. So what types of threats are we experiencing? So these types of risk values and the threats and so on are communicated to other components in the Socrates platform. So other components will use this data to perform other types of analysis. So for example, these threats are also mapped to like stride and MITRE ATT&CK, which can be used in other reporting features in the platform as well. And also the suggested mitigations. So what should we do about this? So in the Socrates platform, we also have a component called course of action generator. So this gives information to the SOC operator what you can do to fix this or to lower the risk exposure, and also come up with strategies. So in what order should we apply these mitigations, and when should we do them to lower the risk exposure, but also to make sure that we have a good uptime and don't disrupt anything and so on.
3 minutes to go.
Yeah,
Eric.
Yeah. So just last thing I want to say, we can also have different types of attacker profiles, like how APT28 would behave, or how some other types of APT would behave based on the threat intelligence that we get. Yeah, and I think Frank has some concluding remarks in 30 seconds, maybe.
Yeah, so we've seen that what we think is that this can be beneficial for SOC CSIRT operations to increase speed of operations and facilitate informed decision making. The Socrates platform will pilot the platform in the first half of 2022. And at the end of that, we will have a demo pilot where we have an event problem. So that's the plan. Another thing is that most of the components will be open sourced. Some of them are already open source, and yeah, you can follow us on the website of the Socrates, and we are on Twitter and LinkedIn. So hopefully next year we have a demo where we can show the whole platform. Thank you. And we are going to the work adventure for additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Frank and Eric. Very interesting talk, and please give them a virtual round of applause. It's okay. So and also thank you for the participants, and you should find them in the kind of the Q&A room on the first floor of work adventure. So if you have any questions and so on, please go to work adventure space. Thank you again.
Great. Thanks, Ryu. All right, everybody, we're going to go on a 15-minute break, and we will resume here at 13:15 UTC. All right. Hi, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and come back from the break. As usual, as we have been doing this week, we are going to have a short advertisement from one of our gold sponsors, Team Cymru. I'll get that playing for you.
Team Cymru provides no-cost threat monitoring to ISPs, hosting providers, and CSIRTs who partner with us. Nimbus Threat Monitor gives you near real-time threat detection, illuminating the compromised assets on your network and those of your clients by correlating your network flows with our world-class IP reputation data. Log into the completely customizable Kibana interface to see your top alerts. Filter out low priorities. Drill down into specific threats, see your top talkers and what they're talking to, and monitor your alerts over time to measure response efficacy. Saving and improving lives is Team Cymru's mission, and making the internet a safer place is integral to that mission. Our intelligence powers many security vendors' offerings, and Fortune 500 companies rely on our intel. Take advantage of our peer signal threat detection today.
Awesome. Thanks again to Team Cymru, one of our gold sponsors. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get this stream back up and running. Again, real quick, we have speaker Q&A over in the Conference Work Adventure. If you're not pre-registered and would like to join Work Adventure today, please send an email to events@first.org and we will get you set up on the system. I'd like to introduce our session moderator, Senior Cyber Threat and Intrusion Analyst at CSIRT, Heinrich Adrian. Rick, over to you.
Hello all, thank you very much, Tracy. This is Heinrich Adrian from the first team member CSIRT, and I will moderating this next session today. We are now in the second half of the FIRSTCON 2021 day 3 in the breakout 1 or stream 1. For your information, there are 2 more streams, live channels that is parallel running live too right now, and you can check it out in the YouTube channel of the first.org. Just one thing before we get started today, we will holding the Q&A immediately following this presentation in the Work Adventure. It is the conference to the virtual social platforms in the same place where you can find our exhibitors and other fun activities. You can join the event over there after logging into the Work Adventure with the registrations and credentials provided to you by the first Secretariat. So here we go to the top. The next session is CSAF 2.0, a new start to automate advisories. This rising number of the discovered vulnerabilities today is make a huge amount of the coordinate disclosure and advisories that is too many to manage and process by each product users to keep their cyber risk level low. This process is very time consuming from the issuers to user, especially if a user is in the business that is having not only IT but OT inside of their industry. So this talk presents a way to reduce that resource by using the Common Security Advisories framework or CSAF that will automate the process on both advisories, issues, and asset users, especially when users which are vendors that is having supply and need to look into the supply chain issues, and CSAF provides these checks through its automation. So let's welcome Mr. Thomas Smith. Hello, Thomas. Are you ready for the talk?
Yes.
Of the CSIRT Bonn, Germany, which the one who will deliver this wonderful talk. He works in the ICS section of the German Federal Office of Information Security, or BSI. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. Thomas, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Rick. So I'm going to start by explaining what is actually our current pain in all the advisory issue. And then I come back and introduce CSAF as a solution. I'll show some of the available tools, and I'll keep you updated on unsolved problems and future work, what we have to do, what is already planned. and I'll get you one slide of key takeaways so that you know what to present to your executive if you go home. So let's start with my first question, and Tracy will present that for us.
Yeah, let me go ahead and I will take the share screen back. All right, everybody, if you point your phones over to Slido, or if you are in front of a desktop computer, you can navigate to slido.com and punch in the number 446725. I will give everybody like 20 seconds to do that. Wish we had some time music.
And we'll have the question there, how many different vendors do you use in your company?
All right, I'm going to go ahead and move this, and we can post this poll up again as well. All right, so.
And please vote.
Yeah, please vote. Let me actually.
Voted.
So I'm really interested in this question, since that's actually one of the key parts here. If you have one or two vendors, that's fairly easy to handle, to look out for the advisories. But if you have maybe 20 to 50, it might get a little bit more complex to do that. If you have hundreds of vendors, it might be mostly undoable. But there might also be a case where you don't really know how many vendors do we actually have in our companies. So I'm not looking for a correct number. I'm just looking for a rough guess. So, and I think we give it one more minute. So please join and put in your results.
I'm going to try something real quick and see if I can show the results in real time as well. There we go.
Oh, perfect.
Oops. Sorry, guys. The workings of my desktop.
That's quite an interesting result. Most of you don't know. And 20% think they have less than 10. So I'm really thrilled to speak to those people in the Q&A afterwards. So.
All right. Oh, still moving. Right. Thomas, you just tell me when you want control of your slides back.
I think we take that
okay.
as the first one, and please join also our next question, which will be there in just a few seconds. So let me share my slides.
You will exactly tell to the audience about what is the purpose of this poll, right, Thomas?
So I'll come to that in just a second.
Okay, thank you.
So when we look at the coordination time frame, it is mostly a vendor becomes aware of vulnerability and he analyzes the vulnerability. So that's normal coordinated vulnerability disclosure stuff. And at some point he releases a patch and advisory. And at some later point in time, the asset owner does something. And this does something could be patch or mitigate risk or actively accept the risk. And what we're looking at is, so our time frame of concern is from the point where the vendor releases the patch or advisory until the asset owner does something. Since that's under the control of the asset owner, and we think this time frame is way too long. So that brings me to my second question, which is basically, do you automate advisory handling? Tracy, please go ahead.
Sure thing. One sec here. All right, it looks like people have already been skipping ahead. Yes, so you can join Slido here. You can point your phone and go use the QR code, or you can go to slido.com and punch in this number. And you should be able to, once you get into the event, be able to see Thomas's questions here as well.
So the interesting question here is, if I have so many vendors, and I know it's a time-consuming process, do I actually already have some automation here? Do I have method and procedures in place which help me to automate these advisories and automate that against my asset database, as well as have that automatically retrieved from the vendors? We're still seeing some changes here. So I'm really interested in, since it's changing so quickly. But most of you at the moment, at least, think you wish there was some automation. And that's actually the need CSAF addresses. And I'll go over that in just a minute to show what we have found, what could be helped in here. And I'm really interested in the people who are saying yes, and it's great, since I don't know such tools which are already available. So please come to talk to me in the Q&A session. All right. We have one more question later on, so please be ready for that. And we just go ahead in the presentation and look into the process, how it's usually done. So if you have a manually advisory handling process, that's mostly there is a vendor out there, puts out human readable advisories, for example, 15 advisories with different kinds of severity. And you can think of the severity maybe like a CVSS score. And then you go ahead, you search on the websites, are there any new or updated advisories? You download them all, you prioritize them by the criticality of the vulnerabilities, and you might have your very critical upfront, and then it goes back until you deal with the low criticality ones. And then you do for each advisory one kind of a cycle, which is basically, do I have affected devices? If no, I don't care about the advisory, just scrap it off the list. And then do a risk assessment as a second step. What's actually the risk involved with this? Is this deep down in my network, where I have plenty of defense and depth layers before that? Or is it an internet-facing device? And then you have to decide which actions you want to take. And that's actually quite a lot of a process, as it's not a one-day job where you think, oh, I do this once a week or once a month. But vendors are constantly putting out such advisories. And you have to repeat this process constantly. So the first step with finding these, it is basically a mess. You go through all these websites, and I just listed a few of them here. And then you have to analyze this stuff, and it's all different formats, HTML, PDF, text files, signed, unsigned, and it has all a different structure. But then the interesting question is, if I have to do this with 3 advisories, I don't care. How many advisories do we have actually to deal with? And that's a question which I would like to put on to you. And Tracy, please go ahead, share slide 3.
All right. Looks like we have some folks who've already answered it. So again, if you're just joining us, you can point your mobile device at the QR code, or you can head over to slido.com and punch in the 446725 to join the poll.
And we're really looking for participation here. Please.
Come on.
So that's quite an interesting question. Since if you do that for, say, one advisory a week, that's probably not too bad. I can handle that. It's probably half an hour work for an advisory, goes through all the different steps. But then still the question is, how do you get informed about the advisories? How do you get notified about them? Do I really have to look into all the websites every day so that I don't miss an advisory which might be critical? Or is there any notification by the vendor which gives me some intel that there is a new advisory? And how do I find it? Is it behind a portal, or is it somewhere where I can easily access that? And that's quite interesting. Nobody have 30 to 75 advisories. Having said that, just one joined. Yeah, so if you're around 0 to 30 advisories, I probably think you either have advisory handling is not really your business, or you don't have that many vendors to watch. That's perfect. Congratulations. But really, when you come to the industrial space, it's huge. There are huge installations, and they have all these different vendors in them, and you have to look into how many vendors do I have there, how many assets do I have there, and where do I get all the advisories? And we'll stop there with the questions and come back to the presentation and give you some insights what we expect that to look like. So as I didn't have a clear number of advisory, I just looked at CVEs, since there might be a CVE. I know there is not for each advisory a single CVE, and sometimes there are more CVEs and more advisories. So, but it gives us an idea how it looks over the years. And if you look to that, and that's mapped out from, I think, so each dot is a year. If you look to that, it's actually rising constantly. We estimate that's an exponential rise in CVEs and also in advisories. So in the current situation, we have this existence of a human readable format. And then we have to manually process that. We only need a web browser for that. And as a vendor, you can do that with Word or any text writer. But really, if we want to have automation in that step, we need a machine readable format so that we can automate the processing of our advisories, and that we can have some content management system on the vendor side, which actually produces this machine readable format, and then gives us the opportunity on the asset owner side to have a smart search there and compare this with our asset inventory. We're not at a point where we really have unique product IDs, since you know from SBOM, naming is a hard problem. So we just start one step at a time and start to automate advisories with bringing in a machine readable format. And this machine readable format is called Common Security Advisory Framework. Current major version is 2.0. It is JSON format. It's machine readable, and it's really built with automation in mind. So we have all that coming in from having conformance standards down to how to distribute CSAF advisories. Standardization is done through the OASIS Open, which is also represented at FIRST, and we have the CSAF technical committee there. And it's actually we always get asked about CVRF. CVRF is the predecessor of CSAF. If you look at an example, a CSAF document actually has 3 parts. So there is document level metadata with all your tracking numbers and your version of the advisory and the revision history and a title and some generic information about the publisher. Then you have, as a second part, your product tree, where you define all the products used later on in the document. And in the third part, you have the vulnerabilities listed as well, to which products they apply and what scores apply to them and what is a remediation action which you should take there. This brings us to an automated handling process. And the vendor doesn't really change much. He just produces machine readable advisories and publish them. But now we as the asset owners or as the downstream vendors could go ahead and say, I automate this finding step. I don't want to search through websites and download that manually. That can be automated. And we get another big advantage here. We can have some automation in the search, do I have affected devices? So I can actually reduce the numbers of advisories which I have to look into tremendously just by comparing that to my asset database in a structured format. I can add a static risk assessment. So for example, advisory 9 might be about an internet-facing device. So that's really something which I want to look at first, since I'm exposed to a potential threat from the outside by not having that vulnerability risk assessed. And there might be another vulnerability, say number 12, which is actually layered way down in my network, very much layer of defense above them before an attacker can get to them. So I might take an environmental score and put it a little bit further down. So, and then I have the new criticality of my vulnerabilities and have that automated adopted. So now I have only, instead of 15, I've only a lesser number of advisories, say 7, which I have to look at, which are sorted by criticality. And now I only have to look into that and think, what decisions do I want to take here? If you look in the CSAF specification, I want to give you a short introduction to that so that you find where you have what you have in which chapter. First 2 chapters, that's introduction and design considerations. And then all the schema elements of the JSON schema get explained. But unfortunately, we can't deal with all that in the JSON schema. So we have some tests. Some of them are mandatory, which render a document invalid when you fail a test of them. Some are optional and some are informative, just to let you know what's best practices and what could you add to make it more valuable to your customers. And then we have a chapter about how you should distribute the CSAF documents. We also add, as a standard in every publication, safety, security, and data protection consideration. And we add conformance targets. And these conformance targets will allow software vendors to describe that their product is a valid product against the standard and implements the standard, and also gives customers the opportunity, if they look for software, just something like a vendor is looking for a content management system which produces CSAF documents, he has a way to go there and find the software. We have StackVisogram as one of the first available tools. It's already on GitHub and you can freely use that. You see a picture of that here. It's basically click and join the items into the JSON format. You have also a human readable preview of the machine readable format. We have a CSAF visualizer, which gives you all the structure of the document in a more readable way. And there's also something which will implement the tests at some point, and it's called CSAF Lint. When I always say we have something, then the question is, who is actually involved in the development of CSAF? And that's big companies, industry-led, from Cisco, Microsoft, Red Hat, Oracle, AT&T, Siemens, but it's also part like BSI is there. But to really make that work, we need the support of the community. We need your support. We do have some unsolved problems, like the unique product identifiers. If you have a solution for that, please talk to Alan Friedman at SBOM. He's pretty lucky if he had a solution for the naming problem, and we will probably adopt that. We don't have an idea of an API yet, so it's at the moment all file-based. We'll probably add that in a later version of CSAF. We're looking into an aggregator infrastructure and how that might develop over time. So at the moment, you would have to go to your 100 to 500 vendors or less vendors if you have less vendors, and collect for each of them in a single instance the advisories. But we have this idea that maybe national certs could use an infrastructure to provide it as a one-stop shop, all the advisories which they collected. We have also some ideas around how to solve configuration issues. So if you have a certain configuration, a product might be vulnerable. If you don't have, it might be not vulnerable. So that's basically what we are going to look into the next versions of CSAF. So here are the key takeaways. The number of vulnerabilities are rising, and also is the number of security advisories. We need these security advisories to make our risk-based decisions. Should we patch? Should we wait? Should we accept the risk? And since that's time-consuming and also resource-consuming, we should automate the boring stuff as automation as possible. So please take action. Request your vendors to provide CSAF documents. Provide CSAF documents if you are a vendor or if you're in industry organizations to your customers to ease their pain. And last but not least, spread the word about CSAF. I'll leave more information for you here where you can find the specification and also SecVisogram, the tool I've talked of. It is not complete. It will develop along the standard, and we will make sure that you can play around with it, always having the current standard there. And that was my presentation. Giving back to Rick. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Thomas, for the great presentation about the CSAF and how CSAF can help us to manage our security disclosures and advisories. And thanks to the audience. If you have questions, because I know that you have many to ask to Thomas right now, you can find the speakers in the Work Adventures, the conference to the virtual social platform, in the Q&A rooms on the first floor. So Thomas, please be there to receive the questions. And for your information to all audience, there are 2 more streams live. You can access those streams from the FIRST.org YouTube channel, and they are now doing the management and other technical talks too. You are right now in the stream number 1, day 3 of the FIRSTCON 2021. Having said that, we will go to the next talk sessions with the title of the Zero Trust Security for the Enterprise. And let's wait for the transitions.
There he is. Hi, Jason.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. How's everyone doing?
Okay, thank you very much for attending the event right now. About the Zero Trust Security for the Enterprise, instead of legendary TCP/IP, Zero Trust is a model that enforces the principle of least privileges across the network, since the ability to establish a connection to the system is in fact a privilege itself. Therefore, systems must authorize all users before they can do so, which is making Zero Trust approach hide systems from the all unauthorized users. So in this talk, the speaker, Mr. Jason Garbis. Hello, Jason. How are you? Are you
doing great? How are you, Henrique?
Yes, fine, thank you. And Jason here is the co-chair of the Zero Trust Working Group at the Cloud Security Alliance to deliver the talk. And having said that, Jason, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to this. We only have a short period of time here, so we're going to go ahead and dive right in. As Henrik mentioned, I have a number of roles. I work for a software vendor called Appgate, and we make a Zero Trust security platform, but I'm not here to promote that or to put that hat on. Really, I'm here as a participant in the industry. One of my roles is that I'm one of the co-chairs of the Software-Defined Perimeter Zero Trust Working Group with the Cloud Security Alliance. And in that role, I work with folks across the industry to help publish research papers to advance knowledge and best practices around Zero Trust and the open architecture called the Software-Defined Perimeter. I also recently wrote a book called Zero Trust Security and Enterprise Guide, which provides a historical and current analysis of Zero Trust, and then looking at it from the lens of enterprise architectures and explaining how this trend in the industry called Zero Trust can and should be interpreted and applied by enterprises. I'll let you know up front, I'm not an incident response expert by any means, so everyone in the audience knows more about incident response than I do. And what I'm going to be doing in this presentation is talking about Zero Trust, giving you some perspective on what it is, why we're here, and hopefully to give you some encouragement for the enterprises that you're working with or working for to have them adopt and embrace Zero Trust. And then we'll look at it through the standard model of the incident response phases to try to understand how a Zero Trust enterprise and an enterprise architecture could be different from an incident response perspective. This is definitely the beginning of what I hope will be a really good conversation from the incident response community for using and working in Zero Trust environments. So let's go ahead and dive right in here. So first, some bad news. And this is not really going to be news, maybe it's just bad, but the reality in our world that all of you know, that we all live in every day, is that we live in a very complex and very highly different, very differentiated IT infrastructure landscape compared to 10 or 15 years ago. If you just look at how applications are being built, how businesses are running today, there's a huge adoption of fantastically powerful and amazing platforms, from infrastructure and platform as a service for virtualization, containerized workloads, service meshes, et cetera. However, what this has done is, with all the power it's brought, has brought an increase in complexity. And I think that it's very fair to say that the security tools and the networking tools that we have to manage and model and control access across all those environments has really lagged behind, and has, without a doubt, given us a very ineffective security platform. We only need to look at the headlines and the terrible breaches and incidents that are happening every single day because of a heightened threat landscape and the very advanced adversaries that we have out there, to reach the not too surprising conclusion that we really have to change things and change the way that we're doing security. The reason, my hypothesis is, the reason that we're in this state is really that there's two things. You know, to some degree, we're fighting with one or maybe even both hands behind our back, right? And ultimately, our networking technology, TCP/IP, as fantastic as it is a weak security foundation. If you look at the history of this, when it was created in the 1970s, the folks who did this I have such amazing respect for what they created with such a limited compute abilities. They had to invent so much technology and standards along the way. And the end result was that TCP/IP is a phenomenally successful protocol that's designed with this notion of complete implicit trust, which is fantastic. If you can send packets to a device across the network, TCP lets you very easily set up a network connection, gives you some level of reliability for communications, and then you can conduct business by communicating messages across that. And the way it works, of course, is that it operates under this connect first and authenticate second protocol. And everyone's familiar with TCP's three-way handshake in order to establish a connection. And the way it works is that, number one, you can really see everything on the network. You can send an ICMP ping and get a response back. You can send a TCP SYN to it on an open port, and you can get a response back. And that's giving you as a IT or a networking professional some great tools to be able to easily network your systems. But it's also providing today far too much information and a very visible attack surface to our adversaries. So the result today is that our adversaries can see all the resources on our network, either at the entry point to our enterprise networks if they're remote, or across our enterprise networks if they've established a foothold inside. Then there's some level of connection establishment. And then and only then is there some level of authentication that happens, typically at an application level. And I know there's some things that are built on top of TCP/IP like 802.1x, but at a basic networking level, this is definitely true, and it's definitely a weakness. That's one weakness. And we can see this through our favorite search engine, Shodan, where you can go out and look for things like the RDP protocol. I did this the other day, and there's approximately 4.5 million RDP servers that it detected available worldwide. And that number, of course, should be 0, right? For goodness sake, don't do this. Don't expose RDP on your networks, and don't expose, for goodness sakes, your Windows login screen, or even worse, a Windows Server 2003 login screen that's publicly available. So number one, TCP/IP doesn't give us any notion of security because it's default implicit trust and default open. Second is that TCP/IP, and this is really, even in today's most advanced cloud environments, you look at infrastructure as a service environments, the network security groups or the security groups that they provide really have to fall back on this very impoverished policy language for expressing access control. And that language is really just, should this source IP address over here have access to this target IP address or subnet over here? And it gives you the ability to say yes or no, allow or block. And the reality is that this is a terrible policy model because IP addresses aren't identities. We know nothing about IP addresses. They change, they're shared, and there's no context whatsoever to make this informed decision about whether or not this source IP address should be allowed to connect to this. And the end result of this is that security teams often give up. They say, look, I have no idea because I've got 5,000 users that are VPNing in and they all get the same NAT IP address, or I've got 5,000 users on my internal network and they have DHCP and I don't really know who they are. And as they go across the WAN, their IP address gets anonymized and I can't disambiguate anymore. I'm going to give up and I have to support the business. So we're just going to have a big open network. Maybe we'll have a couple of VLANs like a production and employee VLAN. And we're going to rely on authentication for access control. And the end result of that is terrible because, as we know, authentication is not sufficient for protecting our services. And there are far too many exploits that are unpatched and well publicized for which authentication isn't even necessary. All an attacker needs is the ability to send network packets to a target server. They can exploit some vulnerability, and then they're into the network and they're on their way. So the solution to this is this concept of zero trust. And zero trust as a philosophy has some principles in mind. And what the goals of this are, number one, is to compensate for the weaknesses of the inherent weaknesses of our implicit trust network. And what zero trust says is, no, we're going to require some level of authentication first before you're actually allowed to establish a network connection. And we do this by reversing this, by turning this process on its head and saying, systems have to authenticate, and there's a variety of means that they can authenticate. We'll talk about that a little bit later. but only after they've authenticated are they actually allowed to establish a network connection. And then, of course, they can only see the set of resources that are authorized for them. So what this implies is, of course, there's some sort of identity system and mechanism for authenticating these individuals or these identities if they're non-humans. And then two, there's a policy model or an authorization model that says, given what we know about this identity, here are the set of resources that they're allowed to access at this point in time. Now, the beauty of this system is that it also makes the system resilient to denial of service attacks, because if you think about this, that if it's done properly, the mechanism, the computational load for authenticating these identities is going to be far, far less than the work and the computational load necessary to actually establish a TCP or a TLS connection and then perform some level of application authentication. So it makes the networks much more resilient, assuming that you do it right. So that's the first piece of this. The second piece of it is that Zero Trust enables a much richer, and I would argue far, far more useful policy language for expressing authorization. And the policy language that a Zero Trust system presents to us is the ability to ask a question like this. Well, should Jim have access to our production SAP server? Okay, that's a really interesting question, and it's actually meaningful to a lot of people across the business. We know Jim has an identity, Jim has a role in the company, and maybe Jim should or shouldn't have access to the production server, but we're not talking about an IP address here. So that's a meaningful question. And the other half of it is, this is our SAP production server. So now we know, okay, this is production data, it's probably got to be protected. Maybe it should only be accessible to people on the finance team, et cetera. That's a really meaningful question that you can build some interesting sets of policies and controls around. Second, the answer to the question that Zero Trust enables is, in fact, it depends. And that's, of course, always the right answer to any interesting question. And what does it depend on? Well, it depends on a lot of really interesting additional elements. And these are exactly the ingredients, if you will, that Zero Trust enables in a policy model. So now imagine a world where you can say, fantastic, I know that this is a production system. I'm going to set up a policy that says, in order to access the user interface to use our financial system, this person needs to be on the finance team in our group, in our directory system. They need to authenticate. If they're remote, they need to use MFA. If they're local, maybe that they don't. They need to make sure that their system, their local device, is patched and up to date according to our database. Maybe it's the type of job or function where we really only want them to connect during typical business hours. These are all really useful ingredients to have in a policy that are impossible to express with traditional networking technologies. So those are kind of the ingredients of where we want to get to. So we think about what Zero Trust is. So Zero Trust is a security philosophy that's happened in the market in the last 5 to 7 years. And in the last year, it's really taken significant prominence and visibility in the market, which is great. There's a downside, which has also become a buzzword, and there's a lot of vendor hype around that. But ultimately, there's some real substance behind this. And if we think about what the United States National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, says, is that this is a set of cybersecurity paradigms that move defenses from our traditional static and network-based perimeters, or I would say perimeter-based networks, and instead focus on users, assets, and resources. So really identity-centric, an identity-centric model. And those identities, of course, can be humans as well as non-person entities. A couple of weeks ago, President Biden of the US issued an executive order around a prioritization and investment in federal agencies around cybersecurity. And one element of this was mandating Zero Trust. And in this order, they define Zero Trust as something that eliminates implicit trust in any one element, node, or service, and instead requires continuous verification, and that's important, of the operational picture via real-time information from multiple sources to determine access and other system responses. So the key elements of this are continuous as opposed to static, and the fact that this thing is synthesizing information from a variety of sources. And we'll see that on the next slide with the diagram. Ultimately, if you look at what NIST is saying, is they list a number of tenets in their document, which is very highly readable. I recommend it. But the core elements of these are these 4 bullet points here, which are first, that all communications is secured regardless of network location. And that's not just data in motion in terms of encryption, but ensuring that there's a model around controlling access for all identities, all users, to all resources, regardless of where the user is, regardless of what network they're communicating over, and regardless of where the workload is operating. Second, that there is a dynamic policy model that enforces authorization. And dynamic is an important piece of it because you get to the third bullet point and they talk about how all authentication and authorization is dynamic and strictly enforced before access is allowed. So this is the principle of least privilege, which harkens back to the let's make sure that all unauthorized resources are invisible on the network. And then finally, there needs to be some monitoring, some enriched capabilities to look at what's happening on the network, and the ability to dive into and look at the security posture of the assets. Zero Trust is not an architecture, it's a approach and philosophy and these set of principles, and it maps to a variety of architectural implementations. So let's take a look at some of those. So this document shows at a high level the concepts of Zero Trust from the NIST document. You can see there's some key elements here. So the first is there's this thing at the top called the policy decision point, or PDP, and that's the brain, if you will. And that communicates with a set of policy enforcement points through a control plane. So the first of all is very classic separation of the control plane and the data plane that we've seen across other industry paradigms. Second is that the subject, which utilizes some computer system, of course, can only access the enterprise resource by going through a policy enforcement point. And the policy enforcement point is the one that, like its name implies, enforces the policies that are given to it by the policy decision point. And there's also some authentication that has to happen for the subject, and I'll illustrate that in the next slide. The boxes on either side of the diagram are really, really important. Those are shown as logical inputs into the Zero Trust system. And you can imagine there's 8 there, but that's just a sample, a complete enumeration of the rest of the elements of your enterprise ecosystem. I mean, clearly, a policy decision point, in order to make identity and context sensitive decisions about should this subject, should this identity have access to this resource over here, needs to look at the identity management system or the PKI system if they're looking at that, probably understanding what's going on in the environment by getting information from a SIEM, probably getting some information from a threat intelligence system, certainly a continuous diagnostics and monitoring system, probably also a CMDB to get some visibility into this. So all these things become input into the policy decision point, so it can then make continuous decisions about should this resource get access to the system over here to begin with, and if something changes in the environment, maybe we need to revoke that access, or maybe we need to enforce step-up authentication for the user. So if we look at the NIST document outlines actually 4 deployment models, and we're just going to focus on one today in the interest of time. And this one is called the enclave-based deployment model. This also happens to be the model that seems to have, I would say, have the predominant or a very common usage or a support in open source and commercial implementations in the marketplace, in particular around the software-defined perimeter. And the idea is that you've got usually an agent, a local policy enforcement point that runs on the user's device. You have a policy enforcement point that acts as a network gateway and sits in front of the protected resources. Both those systems will integrate with and talk to the policy decision point for the subject's case, to authenticate the user, and for the PEP's case, to get information about what policies are allowed and to be in constant touch for real-time changes. And then the communication goes from the subject's device across some sort of secure logical channel through the policy enforcement point to the target resource that sits in some resource enclave. And the beauty of this is that because the PEP is managing the traffic, it has the ability to, of course, block it. It has the ability to influence and affect change on the user's device, such as prompting for step-up authentication. And it has the ability to interrogate the target resource environment for changes, such as, hey, a new resource has appeared with these attributes, so we're going to allow or disallow access based on the attributes. Okay, so I'm going to very briefly give you an example of this, and then we'll shift gears and talk about this from an incident response perspective. So imagine we have an enterprise that has deployed a Zero Trust model and has the attributes that we've talked about. And we'll start with our favorite employee, Sally, who is Director of Finance. So she wakes up in the morning and gets her first cup of coffee or tea and turns on her device and starts to do her work. And the first thing that happens is the device validates, the Zero Trust agent on the device validates that, hey, this device has a proper certificate that was issued by the corporate CA that's in, let's say, some sort of hardware security module. Based on that, the Zero Trust system says, okay, now we're ready to connect to the network, and it allows Sally to access some cloud-based email. But because she's not in an office building, it's going to prompt her for some sort of multi-factor authentication. And Sally doesn't mind because it just does something modern, like pushes a notification to her phone, and she presses yes on an authenticator app of some sort. She also has secure access into some on-premises resources, in this case, file share. So she downloads a presentation that she needs to look at for today. But Sally makes a mistake, clicks on a phishing link in email, and gets some malware installed on her device. After that, she goes to the office, plugs into the network there, or gets on the corporate Wi-Fi, and again, does her job. What happens is the Zero Trust system would recognize that she has roamed, now she's on a different network. It goes through some further validation behind the scenes for her, but says, okay, everything's still good with the device. We're on the corporate network. She can access these department applications and do her job. But what happens is the malware also wakes up, and the malware attempts to do some port scans across the network. And because this is a Zero Trust system, and because everything operates in a default deny mode, first of all, those port scans are blocked. And second of all, they are detected very easily because there's much less noise in the system. So the security system says, hey, this is unauthorized. It notifies IT, it notifies the SOC, and it can also, either in an automated fashion or manual fashion, quarantine her device and says, okay, something is up here. This thing is attempting to do things that Sally never does. We're going to block it from the network. Maybe we'll send Sally a text message or call her up and prevent the malware from spreading on the network. And finally, let's say the security team has said, okay, we need to have our IT administrator connect to Sally's device to remove the malware or to re-image it or whatever. In this case, what they're doing is they're utilizing the capability of a Zero Trust system to integrate with a business process, in this case, the service desk. So they follow their normal process of creating a service desk ticket. The IT administrator, because there's an open ticket, now has the ability to establish this network connection to Sally's device. And what the beauty of this is that Bob, who could possibly have malware on his device as well, doesn't have unlimited 24/7 access to everyone's device. It's only controlled, it's only allowed if there's a service desk ticket that's in the open state. And the service desk ticket is another ingredient into the Zero Trust system's policy decision point. Because that ticket is open, Bob can actually establish the connection to Sally's device. He logs in, he does what he needs to do to clean it up, and then he closes the ticket. And then Bob's ability to connect goes away. Once the ticket is closed and the security system has basically been reset and says, okay, Sally's device is now clean, then she can reestablish the connection. She'll probably be prompted for MFA, and then she can be fully productive again. Very simple example, but it shows some of the flows here and the capabilities. So let's look at this from an IR perspective. Clearly, everyone on the call here is familiar with these 6 phases. What we're going to do is walk through each of these and try to look at it from how a Zero Trust enterprise would have a different perspective or different experience or a different set of capabilities for this. Our premise here is that the enterprise has some sort of Zero Trust system deployed, and we can assume it uses a model very similar to what we talked about in this enclave-based model, that they've got it working in reasonably good operational form. They have good authentication methods and well understood identity providers. They have multi-factor authentication in place for hopefully all users, but at least most users. And they have some level of integration, automated integration between the Zero Trust infrastructure and their security and IT systems. So feeding information that's enriched up to the SIM, for example, and the ability to respond to events from a SOC and tie into maybe a service desk, like we mentioned. So let's take a look. So in the prepare phase, I think clearly there's some basic steps that IR folks all do, shown on the left side. And in a zero trust world, what we would recommend is looking at a zero trust deployment from an IR perspective is, first of all, make sure that you have policy enforcement points that are distributed across the network to get those trust zones as small as possible. So if you go back for a second, the idea here is you have this resource enclave. So try to have that as small as possible. So there's as little as possible communication between these resources here that's outside the view of the policy enforcement point. This is often referred to as microsegmentation, for example. You definitely want to have mechanisms to have either manually or ideally automated for enforcing step-up authentication when various things happen, such as when someone's accessing a particular high-value resource, or when maybe an indication of compromise, or something happens where something's out of the ordinary, so that the system can very easily and automatically enforce step-up authentication for a given user or for a group of users who might be accessing a particular resource. You definitely want to have some device posture checks that become additional input into the zero trust policy decision point. And you have the ability to define network access based on different types of devices, such as, for example, only allowing mobile operating system devices to access some types of resources, but not others. You definitely want to have integrations with an endpoint management systems and a SIM and a SOC. Those are also great inputs into the zero trust policy model, either from a device attribute perspective for, let's say, the endpoint system, or from an event perspective. And then you want to have some instrumentation in place so that the zero trust agents and the policy enforcement points could also be feeding information up to a SIM or a monitoring system. Okay, so that's definitely good practice to prepare from a zero trust perspective. If we look at when we're in the identify phase, zero trust, as we mentioned, because it operates in a default deny mode, dramatically improves the signal to noise ratio. So in theory, quote unquote, all access should only be allowed, should only be occurring for authorized resources that have policies that are evaluated positively and assigned to a user. Now, that often tends to be a little bit more of an end state, because in many cases, organizations don't want to lock everything down, but it's definitely going to block significant chunks of access, such as someone in the finance team should never be allowed to SSH to anything. That's simply, not in their job description. It's not in their skill set. And there's no reason whatsoever not to block all SSH access attempts from people on the finance team. Likewise, you should have very strict control around who's allowed to access any production servers. The zero trust system also provides identity-enriched log and activity data. And this is a real challenge in many cases when you have complex wide area networks with lots of network address translation, or you have people VPNing in, and there's oftentimes it's difficult or impossible for a SIM to disambiguate activity on the network from IP addresses. And because you have these, in a zero trust world, these policy enforcement points across the network, they know exactly which identity is doing what. And that information can be fed into a SIM to make analysis and SOC analyst work a lot easier. The zero trust environment, because it operates as an overlay across the network, gives teams the ability to find a single unified access control model across all those environments. And it really eliminates the difficulties of having siloed access control lists and models for a NAC versus a VPN versus a cloud environment versus a virtualized environment. And that significantly helps improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of people's understanding of what's going on in these environments. People don't have to say, okay, well, why is this thing accessing that? Oh, I don't know. Let's go check the ACL for that system. Well, who knows that? It's George. Well, he's on vacation this week. Instead, everything's in one environment, so it's very much easier to find this stuff. In addition, in the zero trust environment, in most situations, you have an on-device agent running on the user's device, and that can be used to provide additional telemetry. In some cases, it can perform activities. You can often download custom scripts to that, et cetera. With, of course, the caveat that if you're making an assumption that that device is compromised, you don't know exactly what's going on the device, and maybe you take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, but it's certainly better than not having it. In a contained phase, zero trust is great at this because clearly it has the ability to control exactly what access is happening on the network, both inbound and outbound. So it's very easy to isolate these devices. In many zero trust systems, you can literally say, all right, I want to have this device and I'm going to block all network traffic to and from it. And the only thing that it can communicate is now across that control plane. You can also do things that are a little bit more subtle, like enforce step-up authentication or enforce multiple factors of authentication, which is great to do in out-of-band mode. So certainly, if you consider that a device might be compromised, you could easily say, okay, great. We're not going to have the user re-enter a password because there might be a keylogger, but we're going to push something to their phone, for example. You can also, on the network side, much more easily quarantine network zones and do that in a way that's intelligent so that the impact on the business is known and not disruptive, but increases your security. For example, you might say, well, geez, there's some malware that's going over SMB. We're going to block all SMB ports on the file shares. Okay, people won't be able to get to files. Yes, we understand that's going to impact their productivity, but it's stopping this malware from spreading. You can also perform pretty surgical isolation by device type or group or something like that. So for example, if you have a Windows piece of malware that you're concerned is spreading, you can lock down all Windows devices, but leave other devices, other operating systems unaffected by this. So it gives you the real precise control in a way that's very dynamic as well. You can also, in a very advanced phase, even activate honeypots. You might say, this device is trying to access this server over here. We're going to flip the switch and then give the attacker on that device a very distorted view of the network. And instead of pointing them to our real systems, we'll point them to our honeypot systems. Same host name, same IP addresses, but they're actually different hosts. And that would be really interesting to see in action, since it's a very advanced use case. In terms of eradication, Zero Trust can certainly help by offboarding any affected systems. You can decommission them, you can revoke certificates and access, et cetera. And you can even completely take identities off their ability to access. This is a very simple step in terms of offboarding the system. Zero Trust doesn't directly help with, say, going in and cleaning up from malware from a file system or restoring from backups or things like that, although it can help in those worlds. And as always, remember, don't trust the infected device. All right, I know we're going to go about 2 or 3 minutes late, Henry.
It's okay.
In terms of recovery, clearly Zero Trust systems need to, because they operate at scale, because they're intended to really support ideally all users in an enterprise population, there will need to be some sort of mechanism for properly and securely onboarding new devices through some sort of trusted out-of-band mechanism. And that's true whether or not you're recovering from an incident, of course. So those are pretty standard steps. And as the threat level goes down, maybe an organization goes from red alert to yellow alert, that's going to automatically adjust some of the security enforcement across the enterprise by maybe relaxing the level of MFA or the frequency of prompting for MFA, et cetera. And then finally, in lessons learned, Zero Trust is helpful for giving very detailed audit logs of what actually happened, so you can see what device is connected to what, and that can help you understand the blast radius of a particular incident. It can also help you look at which sensors in the environment and mechanisms that are in place did or didn't properly detect the indications of compromise. Gives you visibility into trying to understand what sort of quarantine response the organization took and how effective it was. Looking also at alerting mechanisms and MFA mechanisms, and also gives you the opportunity to say, okay, we have this implicit trust zone here with 50 servers in it, and now we need to invest in actually further microsegmenting those so that those 50 servers don't have unfettered network access to one another. Okay, so that's really the end of what I wanted to go through. I know that was pretty whirlwind in the short 30 minutes that we had, but just to recap, we talked a little about why we're in the state we're in, because we're really been hobbled by traditional networking and security architectures and technology. That Zero Trust is a security philosophy and approach that, when properly implemented, can significantly improve our enterprises' resiliency and ability to protect themselves, as well as make incident response teams a lot more effective across the life cycle. I'm a strong believer in zero trust, and I think that we as security leaders have a real obligation to help push and pull our organizations to adopt this approach. The good news is that everyone in the industry is talking about it. You have the President of the United States talking about it, for goodness sake. So there's a lot of support for it in the industry. If you're interested in more information, I definitely recommend taking a look at the NIST Zero Trust Architecture document shown on the lower left. That's what's called Special Publication 800-207. The United States Department of Defense also recently introduced a Zero Trust reference architecture there, which has a lot of specifications and mappings listed in there. But the most interesting part to me are some of the reference components where they show logical flows of how things connect to each other. The SDP working group in the Cloud Security Alliance has put together the SDP specification. Version 1, version 2 is in peer review right now, and then the architecture guide, which I recommend. And then from a book perspective, the Zero Trust Networks book, which came out in 2017, is highly regarded and does a great job of talking about that. And then my book, which came out earlier this year, from a very vendor neutral perspective, talks about zero trust security and how to look at it from an enterprise point of view. So with that, I know we're out of time, and I look forward to chatting with all of you in the after party, so to speak, on the web platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jason, for the very thorough presentation about the Zero Trust for Enterprise implementation. Let's give applause to Jason for the great presentations. And thanks to all for the audience for listening to the talk. If you have any questions, you can find Jason in the Work Adventure Virtual Social Environment in the Q&A room in the first floor. Please access it with a credential URL sent by the email by the first event team. You can socialize one to another also over there with the colleagues in the first, the exhibitors and the speakers where you can use the facility of the real-time video chat. There are some announcements. So after the short break, we will have the closing remarks shortly. So please stay tuned. And by that, I'm passing the control back to Tracy from the first event team. We thank you so much for the great support for all of us to make this stream becoming successfully in the closing scheme. There you go, Tracy.
Great. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jason. All right. So we are running up to time. We're just pending a few of our speakers for the closing remarks. So I think we'll take a really short break, maybe about 2 minutes or so. So we'll see you all back at your screens in about 2 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. If you're just joining us from streams 2 and 3, we're just running a little bit behind. We're going to probably take another minute or two just to get all of our closing remarks speakers gathered. We appreciate your patience. Thank you. All right, I think we are ready to go with the closing. Thanks everybody for joining Stream 1. We hope you enjoyed all 3 days of another virtual FIRST conference. Before we jump into the closing, we'd like to play our final gold sponsor ad of the week, Virus Total. Ooh, let me actually share sound.
Welcome to Virus Total, helping companies and institutions stay protected every day. We believe unity is a strength, and we are not alone. Since 2004, a community of over 500,000 registered analysts and millions of users contribute to our collective intelligence. To stand up for the challenge to help protect everyone, everywhere. Virus Total, crowdsourced intelligence for everyone.
All right, awesome. Thanks again to Virus Total for supporting the FIRST conference. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started with the closing. We have Serge Droz, who's the current chair of the board of directors of FIRST, and we have Thomas Schreck, who is also on the board of directors of FIRST, and he has been playing the role of conference chair this year. All right, guys.
Thank you, Tracy, for introducing us. So my name is Thomas Schreck, and as Tracy already said, I'm this year's conference chair. As you can imagine, that a conference chair would prefer to be at an in-person event and have all this meeting people and so on. However, due to COVID-19, we needed to change all these plans. Unfortunately, last year and plan a virtual event. For us, there were two main objectives which we wanted to accomplish with this virtual conference. First of all, as you all know, having a perfect lineup of talks. Second of all, we want to have something similar to what we normally have at a conference, at our first conference, social interaction, building trust, and so on. So in order to accomplish those two things, we needed to think a bit differently. So the program itself I must be honest, I had not something much to do about that. So it was an amazing team which was working on. The first most important are the speakers. So the team of speakers who submitted those really interesting talks were the most important part to accomplish that. The second most important part is the program committee and their program committee chair. So I think, especially for this virtual conference, it was a lot of work which the program committee and our chair Natsuko put into, and they, from my perspective, they accomplished exactly what we wanted to have, an amazing program. For the second part, in order that we're building trust, we thought a lot about what can we do. And then this idea came up that we want to have this 2D world, virtual worlds that people can meet, interact, and so on. So far, what I've seen the last 3 days, this map was really used a lot. And a lot of people I met actually also the first time at the first conference, this worked out. So I'm really happy that we did that, and that I hoped a lot of you enjoyed this virtual come together. Lastly, I want to thank the most important part, which is our event team. So Tracy, Chris, Grace, Josh, without your work, without your help, with a lot of understanding about when I was not immediately responding and so on, just would have not been able. So many, many thanks for all that work. So now this conference, after 3 days already event is ending. As I said, really sorry that we can't see us in person, but hopefully next year this will change. So next year we will all see us in Dublin, and therefore I will now pass further to the new conference chair who is doing that, Serge Stross. Serge.
Oh, Serge, you might be muted. Better now.
Okay, so thank you, Thomas. My name is Serge Stross. I'm still the chair of FIRST for another day. And as Thomas said, I'm going to be the conference chair for next year. So one more year of being chair. And I just talked to Thomas briefly a little bit before, and I think a great thanks also goes to him, alongside Mr. Natsuko from the program committee, for all the work he's put in. We're still kind of getting used to doing all of this virtually. We still haven't 100% adapted to the global pandemic, and I hope we never have to 100% adapt to the global pandemic. So I'd like to join Thomas actually in wishing for an in-person conference and an in-person event. I'd also kind of add my thanks and reach out my thanks to all the people involved, the events team that Thomas mentioned, Natsuko, the program committee members, and so on, for this really great and cool event. And I'd also like to extend my thanks to all the sponsors that allowed us to do this for free. I know sponsors is always kind of something where we think, okay, why do we need the sponsors? But they're actually an integral part, and it's their commitment to our community, to FIRST, that makes it possible to do this great event. So thanks a lot to all of them. And so I think enough from my side. With that, I'd like to hand over the mic to Brian, who's going to be next year's program chair, and we'll kind of do a virtual welcome to Dublin. But I see Brian is not online.
No, Brian's not available at this time, but yes, he will be our 2022 program chair.
So Brian Honan is probably not an unknown person to most of you. Brian, living in Ireland, as you can imagine, working in our field, is probably fairly busy right now. So I assume this is part of the reason he didn't show up here virtually. I'm confident we're going to get the situation under control until next year. So we're going to have an awesome in-person conference. With that, the word is back to you, Tracy.
Great. Thomas, Natsuko just joined us. She was coming from another appointment. Natsuko, do you want to say any few words before we close today?
Yes, sure. So I just want to thank everybody for joining the conference this year. And I really hope you enjoyed the content and talking to your peers via the work adventure. And I really miss all of you, and I sincerely hope to see you all next year in Dublin, and or maybe somewhere else at another FIRST meeting. And I would like to thank everybody involved that made this conference possible. So thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you all in the near future. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. All right, guys, I think that's a wrap for what is hopefully our maybe last virtual conference, crossing fingers. Work Adventure is happening. We have one more promoted social hour just so everyone can gather and network and say goodbye. Work Adventure will close at 2000 UTC today. So please head over there. And if you haven't done so yet, it's a great opportunity. But we'll have all of these replays on YouTube. So just check out the channel when you have time. Great. Thanks, everybody. That's a wrap.